سبحان الله سبحان الله العلي العظيم نؤمن به ونستعينه ونستجيره ونستهديه ونستنصره فإنه حق من هدى الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلله فلا هادي له ونصلي ونسلم ونبارك على محمد خاتم الرسل والأنبياء أجمعين المرسل رحمة للعالمين وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن اتبعه بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. ونبتهل إلى الله ونقول: يا رب اقسم لنا من خشيتك ما يحول بيننا وبين معاصيك، واقسم لنا من رحمتك ما يقربنا من طاعتك، واقسم لنا من اليقين ما يهون علينا مصائب الدنيا وأحداثها. سبحان الله العلي العظيم. One of the very basic and perhaps even theoretically undeniable moral precepts is the equal value ascribed to human life. That at least at an abstract level, human beings are obliged to agree with what constitutes, in religious traditions generally, often an article of faith, that God is the maker of human beings and that God made human life equal in sanctity to one another, that the sanctity of human life is undifferentiated and invariable. And we often, especially in the modern age, this idea, this value, this precept has become the cornerstone of so much of the way we structure discourses and narratives in the modern world, at the level of international law, at the level of constitutional law, at the level of criminal law and civic law. The equal value ascribed to human life. And it is a cornerstone of much of the philosophy that makes the modern world, palatable to the conscience of the modern human being. But the remarkable thing about this is that it is also undeniable that once you step away from abstraction, once you leave the realm of pure theory to engaging sociological and anthropological realities that surround us everywhere, you find that so much of the way that human institutions work in real life do not honor that basic moral precept. We live in a world in which it has become entirely acceptable to live with the fact that 5% of the wealth of certain people like Jeff Bezos and people like him, that 5% of the wealth would end world hunger, would prevent the expiration of human life all around the world because of hunger. But not only that, would prevent an untold amount of human misery and trauma that is caused by institutions like human trafficking, that people often are trapped into because of poverty. We live with this reality, and we reconcile ourselves to this reality. But it is not just the distribution of wealth, but indeed it is the way that the human psyche itself reacts to events in unequal ways and in ways that often betray a very different philosophical outlook than the one that we publicly proclaim and the one that we teach to our children in schools as actually values that are embraced by us. We live in a world in which the choice of awareness is the honest, true translator of our real value system, far more than our abstract, dignified, publicly held ideas. Human beings exercise a choice multiple times every day, and in the choices that human beings make, they translate a psyche. In the choices you make, you translate what is truly embedded within. And these choices, in which you translate what is truly embedded within, are a far greater indication of the true philosophical outlook that you innately and sometimes even subconsciously hold, than all the proclamations and all the dignified scholarly discourses in the world. When, for instance, American scholars teaching in a law school are oblivious to what many legal and moral or ethical institutions that focus on the study of ethics, say about the American practice of targeted killings around the world. They choose to ignore what numerous institutions all around the world has been saying about American black sites and who ends up in these black sites and what the fate of the people that end up in these black sites become. They choose to ignore what an entire chorus that sounds about this horrendous practice of targeted killings all around the world. But then that same scholarly community chooses to listen very attentively when the Israeli Supreme Court decides a case in which the Israeli Supreme Court writes a long opinion about targeted killings around the world. In this case, of course, practiced by Israel, not the US. But suddenly, American law professors reproduce the opinion of the Israeli Supreme Court in case books, give numerous lectures about that decision by the Israeli Supreme Court, invite members of the Israeli Supreme Court to their law schools, treat them as honored dignitaries, and pay and study and reflect upon what the Israeli Supreme Court says. This is a moral choice, and it is a far truer indication of the value system held than any abstract theory. We Muslims exercise the same choice all the time. And if you find yourself reacting to the loss of human life in different levels of passion, then you, in turn, have betrayed your real consciousness about the value of human life. And how tragic is it when a Muslim the true, authentic value system held by a Muslim ascribes in real practice lesser value to Muslim life than others, whatever the others are. I wonder how many of us and how many scholars and how many researchers have heard about a horrendous case, the case of Bilal Abdul Kareem. This case would be sufficient to make us rethink the entire trajectory of our modern institutions of human rights, the trajectory of American democracy, our understanding of the value of human life, and many other things. Bilal Abdul Kareem is an American journalist. But, as his name indicates, he is a Muslim. And add to that, he is a dark-skinned Muslim. But his profession is journalism. Bilal Abdul Kareem chose to be a journalist in the Middle East, particularly reporting from Syria. And he was present during much of the fighting with ISIS in Syria, including much of the bombing of purported ISIS locations by the American government. Well, among the things that Bilal Abdul Kareem reported on was that during the Trump administration, when American forces were moving against ISIS, that American forces fought this war largely through remote controls. The troops on the ground were special forces, highly classified, that most of the time we don't even know the name of the military units on the ground fighting ISIS. But every time these special forces would run into tough resistance, they would call in airstrikes. And the airstrikes often relied on imperfect, if not outright erroneous information. But I will add an element, is that the airstrikes in Syria suffered from a very common thing in the psychology of modern warfare. And that is simple moral fatigue. The operators that guide American pilots to throw their bombs in one area or another, and the operators that guide American predators and drones have been engaged in a endless military conflict against quote-unquote terrorism for so long in Iraq and Syria. They have killed so many Muslims that they suffer from psychological and emotional fatigue. As a result of this fatigue, they often witness on their screens that American bombs have incinerated women and children. But the way they relate to the image in the screen has now become numb. So Bilal Abdul Kareem witnesses, among a long array of things, the so-called last stand of ISIS in the in Syria, in an area called Baghuz, where ISIS fighters are cornered into about a square kilometer location. But with the ISIS fighters are many women and children. And in Baghuz, the US undertakes a bombing run that incinerates right there on the cameras, the screens of US military, about 80 to 90 civilians, women and children. Every effort by those who witnessed the massacre to bring the American military to take responsibility for what is a war crime. What is a war crime? Has failed. Members of the military with a conscience who have tried to go to Congress to get Congress to hold the military accountable for its continual and persistent slaughter of civilians in Iraq and Syria, members of the military who tried to get Congress to hold the military accountable or to practice oversight over the military were fired. The US, unfortunately, has grown so accustomed to slaughtering Muslims that it no longer generates any type of reaction, not just in the military, but among the civilians in Congress who practice oversight or who are supposed to have oversight over the military. No investigations, no one held responsible, no one even reprimanded. It is undeniable that our attitude has become these Arabs, these Muslims, are just like stick figures, just like in the video games that we play. We see a bomb heading their direction, and then there's poof, a big explosion, and as long as we don't allow journalists to focus too much attention, then it's all fine. And the US military, indeed, as a recent article in the New York Times reveals, that the US military has done everything to deny journalists access to areas where we've committed massacres. In fact, in Baghuz, having realized that we've killed 80 to 90 women and children, what the American military did is that it went to the location and basically buried all the evidence underground. So razed all the buildings, destroyed all the earmarks of any type of massacre, and simply cleaned his hand of the whole affair and went on. And at the time, Trump came out to declare a great American victory over ISIS, and that was it. Among the people who, in fact, is on the ground reporting about Baghuz and the massacre in Baghuz and others, is this fellow, Abdul Kareem. There is a problem, however. Bilal Abdul Kareem notices that there were 5 attempts to kill him in Syria. And in these 5 attempts, they were drone strikes by the US military targeting him. Bilal Abdul Kareem was never a part of ISIS, never a part of Qaeda, other than the fact that he is a dark-skinned Muslim. He's a journalist. And it just so happens that he's a journalist that reports about massacres committed by the American military on the ground. So Bilal Abdul Kareem, it becomes quite clear. He is apparently on some type of hit list. For whatever reason, and he's not sure why, he is on a hit list by the American military that has tried to assassinate him and failed 5 times. So eventually he comes to the United States and he files a lawsuit against the government, saying, here I am. I'm not a terrorist, I'm not under arrest, but why are you trying to kill me? Why have you tried to assassinate me 5 times? The district court dismisses the lawsuit for it dismisses the lawsuit on the grounds of state secrets doctrine. So the US responds in this lawsuit by saying, we can neither confirm nor deny anything. We can't even discuss the incidents that you are complaining about. We can't say anything about anything. Why? Because if we do, it will endanger national security. The district court, without even looking at the state's evidence, accepted the excuse of national security and dismissed the case. The circuit court affirmed the district court. And then Bilal Abdul Kareem and his lawyers sought review in the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court did not accept cert, meaning the Supreme Court did not agree to review the case. So where does this leave Bilal Abdul Kareem? He's a US journalist. His crime is free speech. As far as he knows, he has committed no other crime. Free speech. But where does that leave him? It leaves him nowhere, because the judiciary has decided that it cannot have oversight. The American military might be trying to kill him, might not, we don't know, but we're not going to review this. He went to Congress, he found Congress disinterested. No response. attitude in Congress is the same attitude with all the other targeted killings. And it's the same attitude with the massacre in Baghuz and all the other human rights violations, whether black sites or torture or murder or violation of the Geneva Conventions or war crimes. Congress prefers not to hear about it. So although a US citizen, as long as he is in the US, theoretically he's safe. But once he leaves the US, and especially goes to a Muslim country, because the US feels free to kill people in Muslim countries. But the US doesn't feel free to kill people in France or Britain or Russia or Japan or Australia or Taiwan or India. Only in Muslim countries. So we might wake up one day and hear the news like Awlaqi's son, who was killed 10 years ago, a teenage kid attending the birthday party. His family's attempt for any justice, not even with the murder of Awlaqi, the father himself, but the teenage son, killed in Yemen 10 years ago. No recourse in courts and no recourse in Congress. Not even the admission of a mistake. You know, it is easy for young punks to pretend that there are sophisticated matters here. Geopolitics, complex rules of jurisdiction and standing, complex rules that balance between the powers of the legislature and the executive and the judiciary. We can always escape to complexities in order to deny obvious truth. The truth is, the way we handle the details betrays our understanding of the value of human life. And it is undeniable that when we are talking about someone with a Muslim name, someone who's dark-skinned, in this weird, anxiety-looking and anxiety-producing look that the world of Islam generates in us, suddenly our reaction to the loss of human life is very different. If the person is killed in France, a white person, or if it's an Israeli killed, if not only that, but if a white person who's not a Muslim is silenced, our reaction is very different. We are not troubled by the First Amendment connotations of silencing journalists exposing an American war crime. We are not troubled. Even my revered colleagues in law schools are not going to be passionately moved to hold symposia, exceptional lectures, special conferences about a figure like Bilal Abdul Kareem, just another Muslim. We often forget that we human beings are very good at fabricating fictions. In truth, law is a fiction. Institutions of governance are fictions. Even the currency we use is a fiction. The markets we handle, we deal with, are fictions. The institutions that we create as human beings are all fictions. But I choose to believe that ethics underlying all of this are not fictions. Morality and ethics is the only truth that we have. And when we manipulate the institutions of law and politics in order to undermine the only truth that we can actually rely on, nothing is left. But I would be remiss if I didn't say that sadly, racism, ethnocentrism, cultural egoism, all types of biases, unfortunately, is what we can expect. But my question is, where is the victim? I, of course, looked up the lawyers representing Bilal Abdul Kareem. And of course, as I expected, no Muslims. I, of course, looked at how much help Bilal Abdul Kareem is getting from his Muslim community. Organizations like Impact in Los Angeles that brags about, oh, we do this and that to help Muslims. Not interested. Doesn't touch something like this. Muslim institutions, as I expected, run and duck for cover. They don't want Bilal Abdul Kareem invited in their honored Muslim events. They don't want Bilal Abdul Kareem's lawyer to come talk to them about how dangerous a precedent this is. They don't even understand intellectually the importance of having a discourse about how Islamophobia and the impact of Islamophobia in undermining American constitutional values and American democracy. You see, the Muslim ban didn't just hurt Muslims. It undermined American democracy. The killing of Awlaki and his son didn't just hurt Awlaki's family and hurt Muslims. It undermined American democracy. This case, like the cases in Guantanamo, where people are held without charge or trial for 20 years and indefinitely, doesn't just hurt Muslims, it hurts American democracy. Islamophobia and the racism, the driving engine of Islamophobia, is undermining the foundations of American democracy. But no, Muslims are oblivious. They don't even want to hear a lecture about how race is an essential component in this process of dehumanization, and that process of making the hypocrisy about the value of human life and our belief in First Amendment values, freedom of speech. They don't want to hear how race makes this hypocrisy palatable and acceptable and easier to swallow. No, no, no. They're too busy. They're too busy doing Muslim things. You see, it's one thing for Allah in the hereafter to look at non-Muslims and say, why didn't you value Muslim life equally? But it's an entirely different thing when Allah looks at a Muslim and says, as a Muslim, why did you value the life of your Muslim brother and your Muslim sister as less, as not as important? قولوا قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم نسأل الله يستجيب. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والحمد لله رب العالمين والحمد لله رب العالمين سبحان الله العلي العظيم ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له ونصلي ونسلم ونبارك على محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن تبعه بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. SubhanAllah, another very, I don't even know how to choose the words to describe this. Notable, significant, I don't know. In 2019, the Emirates sponsored a document called the Document on Human Fraternity that was signed by the representative of Azhar, signed by the Pope, and by representatives from other religions, including, of course, Judaism. And the Document of Human Fraternity was basically supposed to be a document about human tolerance, religious tolerance, that all the major religions in the world would tolerate one another and keep. Now, of course, if we would hold this document to its terms, I would like to ask many Jewish and Christian institutions, why do they tolerate bigotry and Islamophobia? But no matter, it seems like this document basically works one way. It's about Muslims tolerating the other. But what Israel does with the Aqsa Mosque never becomes a subject of discussion. How Israel treats Muslim institutions never becomes a subject of discussion. Even how India treats Muslims and the rising Hindu fascism in India. Anyway, But the document was signed in 2019. And then the Emirat made clear that it's building what has become known as the Abrahamic family house, Al-Bayt al-Ibrahimi. And this interesting architectural animal is the building of a mosque, an odd-looking mosque without a minaret, and an odd-looking church and an odd-looking synagogue, all in one complex right next to each other, as a symbol of Abrahamic religious tolerance. Muslims, Christians, and Jews can coexist. Now, interestingly, the Shaykh of Azhar has played a rather significant role in this. Because, as I said, he signed the document on human fraternity. He has a very famous picture where he's shaking hands with the Pope after signing the document. And it was said, rumors said, that despite the fact that Sisi, the president of Egypt, intensely dislikes the Shaykh of Azhar and would love to remove him and get rid of him, that the reason he tolerates him is that he is backed up by the Emirates, and that the Emirates basically provides protection for the Shaykh of Azhar against Sisi's despotic, authoritarian, fascist government. And in fact, it is well known that the relationship between the Shaykh of Azhar and the government of Emirat is stellar and wonderful. Recently, however, there was a rather significant development. Shaykh al-Azhar took a very unusual step and a very unexpected step. In a recent event, it was an Egyptian celebration, Shaykh al-Azhar got to the podium and started warning the Muslim world against a new religion that the Emirat is sponsoring, funding, and disseminating. Now, for Shaykh al-Azhar to take this stand at great cost to himself, because that puts him in a clashing course with the Emirat itself. And only Allah knows what the Emirat is going to do now. But the fact that he couldn't stand it anymore and said, yes, I've signed the document on human fraternity. The Abrahamic family house is one thing. I'm fine with the Abrahamic family house, a church next to a mosque, next to a synagogue. Fine. But he warned that there are parties, which he didn't name, by the way, he said just parties, who are aggressively funding and disseminating a new religion called Al-Aqidah Al-Ibrahimiyya, or the Abrahamic faith. And this new religion basically says Muslim, Christian, Jewish, it's all one thing. There are really no differences. And any differences are artificial and should be smoothed over. And we should melt, we should, take Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, put them in a blender and come up with a single religion called the Abrahamic religion. You know, things like salah, fasting. No. You know, you could, in Ramadan, you could choose to fast Muslim way, fast Christian way, fast Jewish way, or not fast at all. Allah is fine with all of it. In prayer, you could choose to pray Muslim style, Christian style, Jewish style. Allah accepts all prayers. It doesn't matter. In fact, all the disagreements that could appear significant to anyone are just false. Muhammad, after all, ﷺ, didn't care if you followed Jesus or Moses or him. It would have all been the same to him. The interesting thing is that this idea of spreading a single religion for the entire Middle Eastern region is an old idea. It was an idea initially held by American neocons. It was attributed to Henry Kissinger at some point. I couldn't verify that. But American neocons said, you know, the solution to the Palestinian-Israeli thing, the solution to make Israel safe and secure in this region, is to get these Muslims to be less fanatic. And the way you get these Muslims to be less fanatic, we can't work with their Sunnah and their Quran, is to tell them it is all one religion. But of course, Israel and the neocons that were excited about this project in the 90s couldn't find a foothold to disseminate it. They wrote about it. They wrote about it a considerable amount. They tried to create grants and institutions in the West to push for it. Interface this and interface that. We're all one. There are no differences. Whether you're Christian, Jew, or Muslim, it really doesn't matter. Until the Trump administration. And the so-called deal of the century, which is supposed to dissolve the Palestinian issue, end the conflict over the Aqsa, over Jerusalem, and blend Muslims. Now, the irony of this, yes, you've guessed it. Christians don't do much blending. No Christian is told to pray 5 times a day. And Jews continue holding on faithfully and religiously to their rituals. Yes, it is only Muslims who, in this Emirati paradigm, who are expected to dilute and lose any significant or distinctive characteristics. The reason that Shaykh al-Azhar couldn't hold his silence anymore is because the Emirat, with Emirati money, is in fact gaining a significant foothold in spreading this new religion that is being taught as the modern religion, the religion that is appropriate for al-marhala, the age, the period. That now it is the age of no Jerusalem, in fact no Mecca. They're both insignificant. These don't say anything about Rome, of course, the papacy in Rome. Everything that I've read is about Jerusalem. You know, but for Muslims, Jews are supposed to continue caring about Jerusalem. That's different. I am not kidding you. And there are converts that have been bought by the Emirat that are given significant time on the airwaves and making significant grants and financial rewards available including for the first time, the Emirat convinced Saudi Arabia to make Saudi citizenship available to certain target people, including some very famous Muslim scholars who were given Saudi citizenship, like Sayyid Radwan, or Radwan al-Sayyid, sorry. Radwan al-Sayyid, the famous Lebanese scholar, in return to disseminate this new religion. I don't know if Shaykh al-Azhar is aware of this, but Shaykh al-Azhar, this is not a new thing. You know the history of Baha'ism. And you know that Sikhism was an invention of the Muslim ruler of India who got the bright idea of mixing Hinduism and Islam into one religion, which became the Sikh religion. And Baha'ism emerged initially as an idea of mixing Judaism, Islam, and Christianity into one. And here we go again. Now, since Shaykh al-Azhar warned the Muslim world about this, let me warn to those who hear me or care to listen to me, whoever you are, if you have a conscience, the Islam that the Emirat is funding in the US is an Islam that is equal in every respect except some ritualistic aspects to the new Abrahamic religion. The orders from the Emirat is to push what they call the Abrahamic creed. Convince Muslims that it is uncivilized and contra tolerance to fight for any cause. These are the instructions from the Emirat to bin Bayya and his children and his kids. Convince Muslims that it is radical, fanatic, that they shouldn't care about the Muslims in China or the Muslims in Myanmar or Palestine or Jerusalem or Muslims in India or Kashmir. None of these issues matter. They shouldn't care about targeted killings. They shouldn't care about Guantanamo. They shouldn't care about black sites. They shouldn't care about Black Lives Matter. They shouldn't care about race. They shouldn't care about anything. What they should care about is getting married. Focus on getting married, because that's having your religion. Oh, you're coming to talk to me about all these causes? No. Islam, brother, go get married and raise your children. That's Islam. And don't think for a second that this is the product of a systematic intellectual dynamic. There's no intellectual anything here. What is behind this is Emirati money. Money. As simple as that. People who are willing to fudge their beliefs, to turn their convictions into vanilla, so their pockets can be full of Emirati money. Maybe some of you will wake up before it's too late and you leave this world, and Allah holds you fully accountable for what you chose to ignore and what you chose to do. Allahumma afu anna. اللهم اغفر لنا اللهم ارحمنا يا رب اللهم اهدنا لأقرب من هذا رشدا يا علي يا عظيم آمين آمين يا رب العالمين. Allah forgive our sins, grant us the right path, fill our hearts with wisdom, beauty and knowledge and ethics and morality and goodness. Fill our hearts with love for you, Ya Allah, and love for your blessed Prophet, Muhammad alayhi salatu wassalam. And guide us to illumination and wisdom. Ya Ali Azim, wa sallu wa sallam wa barik ala Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi.